Hello, how's it going? I hope you're doing well and having a good day so far. Today I wanted to walk you through how to actually approach choosing a Linux distro to start with, especially if you're completely new to Linux, you're coming over from Windows or Mac. If you don't like the fact that Windows has spyware and you're just trying to find something else to use that doesn't have that, or maybe you are interested a little bit more in customization, I'm going to walk you through how I would approach choosing a Linux distro if I were, starting again without any Linux experience. And I'm gonna kind of walk you through a few tiers of how you would appreciate, what sort of features you're looking for. I'm gonna go through what I would sort of define as tier 1 through tier 4 of how you would be looking for distro based on what features matter to you. And I think the main principles I'm going to talk about here actually apply down the chain as well to desktop environments and, window managers, and really just how you're looking at features in general, because at the end of the day, there is no objective best distro. So you shouldn't worry about trying to find the best distro, even, especially if you're just starting off, there is no best distro, there is not going to be a best. When you're more familiar with Linux, you might start thinking, okay, this one distro is better than this other one for various features, or this desktop environment, I like the look of feel of this one more than this other one for these reasons. But especially when you're just starting out, there is no objective best, and at the end of the day, a lot of it is personal preference. It's all GNU/Linux. So I just wanted to say that starting off, just to be very clear that you don't have to worry about getting the best distro. And if you get a distro you don't like, you can always switch it, and you can always, try distros in VMs or with a USB live boot first, so you can, figure out what you're getting. But that said, let's actually get started. And the first thing I want to show is this very helpful chart. Okay, there's a bunch of these floating around the internet. This is one of them, and this actually has other non-Linux kernels in it as well. This has like the BSD kernel, etc. So this is a pretty fleshed out chart with a lot of different options, and it goes, have you got experience with Linux? If so, do you care if it's minimal? Do you care if it's bloated? Do you care how free it is? Do you want to install packages from compile packages from source, etc.? And if you don't know what any of that means, then don't worry, because I'm going to kind of simplify this chart a little bit. Now, I will link this in the description if you want to actually just go ahead and pick something based on a chart like this, since I think if you are familiar with Linux at all, this can be really helpful. But if you're not, and you don't know what, any of what I just said means, then I would say just use Linux Mint, okay? It is one of the various beginner-friendly distros, and really picking any of those beginner-friendly distros, you can't go wrong. But if you really don't know what to pick, just use Mint. It's based on Debian, meaning it's pretty stable. It comes with a lot of default applications. It is very geared towards new users, so you can just get started with it. It also has various desktop environments, and the desktop environment is what you're actually seeing when you're, in the system here. So this screenshot here is the desktop environment, one of the various ones available for Linux Mint. There's actually a few. I think it's got Cinnamon available, Mate available, and XFCE available, if I'm remembering correctly. So you can pick any of those. And of course, yes, you can change your desktop environment later on, and the distro is not the same as the desktop environment. The distro is what's underneath, the desktop environment is what's on top, right? So you can change your desktop environment later on, but if you're not comfortable with that yet, you're just getting started, I would recommend just picking a distro based on whatever has a desktop environment you like out of the box. Whatever, first of all, has a simple installation process, and second of all, has a desktop environment you like. And those are the two main things I would, go for if you're sort of a tier 1 level user at this point. So, you're just getting started with Linux, you don't know much about, the command line or what's under the hood, and you just want to get, a decent Linux experience that has a look and feel you like. I would just go with either one of the options available for Linux Mint, or just another, beginner-friendly distro that has a desktop environment you like. So, for example, Ubuntu here has the GNOME desktop environment. This is sort of a couple screenshots of how that looks like. There's also Kubuntu for the, it's Ubuntu, but with KDE. This is KDE 6, and KDE is nice because there's lots of theming available, and you can tell this is not my screenshot, it's got somebody's name in it. I just found it on web search, so I don't know. But this is just KDE 6. You can retheme KDE if you wanted to. KDE has lots of nice customization, so if you like how KDE looks, you could go with Kubuntu. And I would say KDE is somewhat similar to how Windows feels if you're looking for that. There's also PopOS, which is supposedly friendly towards gamers, which I have not used PopOS, so I can't swear by that, but you know, that is how it's advertised, and it has, I believe, the Cosmic desktop environment, and that's what this looks like. And then getting on to sort of tier 2 users, when you start caring about, okay, what features are underneath, and something I would suggest, you know, for how you might approach thinking about features, right? One of the features you might care about is how fast are you getting package updates. So an example of this would be Manjaro, which is still, you know, pretty beginner friendly to install, right? It's going to guide you through the installation process. It's got a GUI installer, and you can pick, you know, several different desktop environments. I think it's got KDE available along with some other ones. So that's Manjaro, but the main appeal of Manjaro is that it's an Arch-based distribution, and if you don't know, Arch has rolling release bleeding edge updates, meaning packages are updated very quickly, and you're getting, you know, unstable package updates so that you can get, you know, the fastest updates possible. And if you're new to Linux and you're not, you know, quite ready for completely unstable packages that could break, you might want to use Manjaro, which is a more tested version of Arch, and you're still going to get that Pacman package manager if you've heard about that and, you know, want to use something like that. So that's where you might start, you know, in the tier 2 level, start considering, you know, what features are available in the distro that you're looking for. So I would say that's tier 2 there. Tier 3 then would be, all right, you're getting pretty serious about distros. Either you're completely new but you're ready to fully jump in and get your hands dirty, or you've been using Linux for a little while and you're kind of ready to take another step into getting more serious about what's under the hood. And that's when you can start comparing, you know, seriously what various programs is, you know, this distro using. Maybe you even want to look at different kernels. Maybe for some reason you want to use the BSD kernel, or you want to even go to like Solaris or something, and that's when you would start objectively making comparisons between, okay, this distro does this one thing, this other distro does something else, which of these things do I prefer? And, you know, an example of this might be Arch versus Artix, right? And so Arch has systemd and Artix doesn't, and you could sort of make a comparison saying, okay, therefore Artix is better and superior to Arch because systemd is bad, and for these reasons I don't like it, and I think it's objectively worse. And that you could sort of make an argument saying systemd is objectively worse, and I personally do agree with that. But this is where I also think the philosophy of personal preference should kind of reign supreme here. I think when it comes down to it, it's just going to be what your personal preference is, and systemd is only a certain portion of your system, and, you know, maybe that's a deal breaker for you and that makes you really want to use Artix instead, or maybe you don't really mind it, like, yeah, it's not perfect, but you don't mind it, so you're willing to just stick with Arch because maybe you like the Arch forums, or you like that Arch is popularly used, meaning there's sort of more support available for it. But really, you know, you can just look at all of these various aspects of distros, various features, and see pros and cons. And I would say that's sort of like a tier 3 level of interest in distros and interest in choosing distros. And I think tier 4 is then finally, all right, you're like really into it, right? You want to be building, you know, custom kernels or Linux from scratch, or you're super into it. And I wouldn't even say I'm at tier 4, right? Like, I'm willing to just use Arch and deal with, you know, even if there's one tiny thing here and there I don't like about the kernel. I'm not really, you know, wanting to, you know, build Linux from scratch or use anything like super heavy like that. I'm not really yet into, you know, compiling packages from source with Gentoo. I've checked out Gentoo. I actually do like it, but that's, you know, for daily use, I don't want to be compiling packages from source. So, you know, that's sort of tier 4 where you're really into it, you're all the way going. But I do also want to say, right, if you end up, you know, starting on Linux Mint, right, Linux Mint here, if you start on Linux Mint and you enjoy Linux Mint and a year later you're still using Linux Mint, keep using it, right? There is no reason to switch a distro just because there's supposedly, better things about a different distro. If you are getting everything you need out of the distro you're on, and it has all the features you need, it doesn't have anything that's driving you crazy, there is no reason to switch to another distro. And maybe if you don't like the desktop environment you're on, switch the desktop environment without changing your whole distro. But really, don't, worry or obsess over getting the absolute best distro, because when it comes down to it, there's pros and cons to everything. And if it turns out that down the line you really feel like I would, prefer to use Arch as opposed to Ubuntu, then great, go for it. And for the record, I will say I have a beginner-friendly Arch installation tutorial, so if you, out of the gate have already done your research and really want to use Arch because, you like Pac-Man, and you like that it's, rolling release, bleeding edge, you like that it's a very minimal base installation so you can fully customize. If you've sort of gone through all of those features and you really want to use it, I have made a guide for beginners on installing Arch that's also going to kind of teach you some of the fundamentals of Linux. So that way, if you are switching over from Windows and you really want to just use Arch, that should help you out. So I will link that in the description. But yeah, really, when it comes down to it, it's just going to be personal preference. If you don't know what to use, just use Linux Mint. And I did also mention that this concept kind of applies to desktop environments and window managers as well. And really what prompted me to make this video was that I had gotten a few comments on my Arch plus DWM video, sort of saying, okay, is DWM objectively better than Hyperland or i3 or any other window manager? And, if so, why? If not, why? And I think the short answer is no, it is not objectively better, and no desktop environment is objectively better than any other, because when it comes down to it, it's always going to be personal preference, right? Like, take KDE versus GNOME, right? I could say, I think KDE is better because there's a lot more customization available out of the box, it's way easier to customize it, but somebody else might say, I like how sleek GNOME is, I don't mind that there's no customization because I just like it, which is completely fine. And the same thing applies to window managers with like DWM versus Hyperland, for example, right? I like DWM because it's very minimal out of the box. I like that I can go through and read the code and edit it. And it's easier to edit than something larger like Hyperland where you have a lot more code involved. But somebody else might say, I really like that Hyperland uses Wayland. I like that it has all these nice animations. I like how it looks. I like the plugins, right? So it's always going to be personal preference when it comes down to it. And yes, I could still make objective comparisons saying, for example, I find that DWM makes me, more productive and faster. The tiling is makes me faster than if I were to be using a desktop environment, or, it's faster than if I were to use Hyperland with animations, etc. Or maybe, it's better than i3 because it's got floating windows. And then somebody else might say, well, I don't care about floating windows, so I can just use i3, right? So it's always going to be personal preference, and the same thing applies to distros. You can make these objective comparisons, but it's always going to come back to whether you actually care about that comparison, whether it actually affects your, usage style and workflow. But anyways, I'm kind of rambling on, so end of story, just go with Linux Mint if you don't know what to use. If you want to use Arch because you like the features Arch has, I will put in the description my tutorial for, beginner users to install Arch. Try things in a VM, try them on a live USB stick, so you can kind of figure out what features you're looking for. Anyways, hope this helped you out and got you started with picking a distro if you weren't sure what to pick. And I will see you next time. Peace.